We're going live. Okay. All right. We'll give folks a um, minute or so to be able to have the opportunity to jump in. Apologize for the technical difficulties tonight. Somehow I got the links mixed up with our informational session that we're holding tomorrow with our webinar series that we're holding this evening. So um, my apologies for that. Thank you, Deborah, for the heads up and um, being able to correct that. I had to, Deborah, I had to delete that link because we had already started that stream. Is there any way we can get them to email that out, or can we email that out to them? Uh, Hopefully, they can get the amended link. All right. All right. Well, hopefully, Deborah can get that emailed out for us. And in the meantime, um, want to remind folks that our upcoming deadline for the Indigenous Perspectives in School Librarianship Scholarship is April 1st. So please do get the word out, spread that information near and far. Dr. Reno has sent out emails regarding, the application process and the flyer, and uh, we're able to, get that information to folks in different formats. Let us know if we can reach out to anybody specifically if they have questions or concerns. Um, our email, librarymedia@montana.edu, is a place where folks can go to be able to, you know, ask us questions and get any information that they need about the process. But today I'm joined by a good friend of mine and colleague. She is an education specialist with the National Indian Education Associate, also a graduate student here at MSU, and so really excited to have her here with us today to talk a little bit about microaggression within the classroom, specifically as it relates to social studies. And so, without further ado, thank you to everybody that's jumping on. If you didn't get the apologies at the onset, we mixed up the link for tomorrow's informational session with today's webinar series. So I've got a lot of things going on this week as we're approaching the due date for the IPSL scholarship. So my apologies for getting my wires crossed there and sending Deborah the wrong link. So please don't rake Deborah over the coals. That one was my error there. So I apologize. But I can see folks jumping on now. So really good to have you. Danny, folks are real familiar with this format. They know to ask questions,
No.
and as they're you know coming up in the chat box, we'll pull them through, and feel free to defer the questions until the end, or answer them as we go along. But I might just put them up there on your screen, just so they're there. So however you want to take those questions, we can wait till the end, or answer them as we go. Without further ado, good friend, fellow Oglala, don't hold that against us. We're in Montana country. But great to have you, Danny, and thanks so much for your patience hanging in there with the technical difficulties this evening.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, I think we have you on mute there, Danny. Can't hear your voice.
No, it says I'm mute.
How's that? No?
I think I'm a little delayed, though. I can tell a little
No, I
delayed.
still can't hear you.
Heck. My bar says, it's like a bar underneath my picture, and it says that like it's moving when I talk. Like, oh, Deborah can hear me. Weird. Now I can't hear you, Bill. Yeah. Get out. Well, no, probably shouldn't do that, I suppose. Okay, well, I can't hear myself and I can't hear you. Should I try and
There you
get
go.
back in?
We're good to go.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Bill, for having me join your conversation. From what I understand, you guys have been talking about racial microaggressions, and it just so happens that Dr. Christine Stanton and I did some work regarding racial microaggressions in social studies education, but we also wanted to recognize that racial microaggressions happen all over within education, especially within the context of Native student experience. And so a lot of what we looked into and shared with our education work was looking at pre-service teachers as well and their experience as Native students within uh, the social studies field and how to essentially like overcome that. So I'm really thankful that I'm here to be able to share some of this stuff with you. Please, by all means, I see there's a chat box on the side. So if anyone has a question or whatever, or notices I'm glitching or whatever the case may be, I will try my best to keep track of that. And so before I begin, like Bill said, I'm Ogallala Lakota. I'm an enrolled tribal member, but I grew up in Montana, and I've always felt, I've always been faced with a lot of racial microaggressions, not understanding what racial microaggressions were. And so like education has been a really great space for me to kind of unpack that and also learn how to put that energy towards something good, and building understanding around Native student experience and how to kind of address that. And so it's been really awesome to get this opportunity to do a little bit of research around things that I'm passionate about, because sometimes we don't always get that opportunity. And so yeah. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen here. Let's hope everyone can see it. Ah, you know what, Bill? I think it's because I'm not on Google Chrome. It's saying that I need Google Chrome to share my heck.
Okay.
To share my project. Shoot.
Do you wanna
Okay. Yeah, I
email
have
it to
Google
me and I can
Chrome.
try to?
Yeah, it should be in your email. I did send you.
Okay, that's the same one.
Yeah.
All right, let me pull that up real quick.
Sorry about that. But yeah, I I've been in Bozeman for probably, gosh, almost 13 years, and I have 4 children, uh, 2 little ones not in school yet, and 2 that are in high school. And um, there's a lot of times when my kids come home from school and they share certain things that they experience in the classroom. So the relevancy of racial microaggressions is like, uh, it's we're right in its face right now, and I feel like we have a lot of great tools and resources to help us with that. But sometimes it can be really challenging and hard. So of course, we try to address that as well. Um, so okay, excellent. So should I just tell you next slide or
Yeah.
okay? And there is nothing fancy, so each slide is just a slide with no, you don't have to click it a bunch of times for everything. So So yeah. So like I said, this work has been done by Christine Stanton and I in 2016. You can go to the next slide. I was a McNair scholar in my undergrad, learning to do graduate research through that program. And so this was the topic that I chose uh, to like dig into. And it was a really great way for me to learn about research, but also how to apply research to the classroom. And so I I think, that understanding that space and how to find research, but also how to apply it has been really pertinent to my understanding and development within the classroom, and like how I can share tools to address these kinds of situations, because we don't all come from the same place and we're not all the same, the same person. And so I feel like there's got to be a lot of, not a lot, but there's got to be kind of a range of different ideas so that people can um, uh, open their mindset about how maybe to address these needs. Obviously, it's still a problem, and so hopefully some of this will help you with your own work in advocacy with racial microaggressions. You can go to the next slide. So our purpose was to deconstruct racial microaggressions. A lot of people didn't even understand when we were um, surveying and gathering data, didn't even know what racial microaggressions were, or that they were even doing that they were even committing, I guess, a racial microaggression. And so we had to figure out how to reach people to get their understanding of what racial microaggressions are and what they look like. And so sometimes they're things that may not be super apparent.
Sorry about that.
And that's okay. That they might not be apparent to people. And so how to address them was really for us to figure out how to address that was kind of a challenge, because we want to be delicate. We didn't want to scare people off, but we also acknowledged that if we didn't say anything at all, then we were kind of contributing to the problem. In addition, offering examples of counter narratives, so that I think the strongest way to understanding like hardships and issues is through student voice. So we went to town and asking Native students their experience and kind of stories that they encountered. And this was really inspired by an incident that took place at Montana State University in my undergrad, when one of my peers was in a health sciences class, and her instructor was really throwing a lot of inappropriate terminology out there, and he was really focused in on like data about American Indian populations, and wanting to just like share all the ugly stuff, right? Like, oh yeah, Native American populations are the low, they have the lowest age rate of, or age death rate in the United States per capita, and just like all of these really, negative things, nothing good to say. But then after that, when he got to the point of talking about tobacco, he's like mentioned some comment about Native Americans being the cause of people's addiction to cigarettes. And it was like he was joking but not joking, and it was a very awkward and difficult situation for this person, my friend, and she was very upset and she left the class. And that was just one small occurrence, but it was actually like big, because they had to do an investigation, because this person had been known for doing acting this way. And so it was tough on her to continue with her studies and then also be a part of this investigation. It was not a pretty experience for her. And so we being able to understand that and know what her story was, I think can help us, and as in addition to other stories it can help us understand how we can better serve those students in our classes, as well as colleagues maybe who experience those tough times as well. Next slide, please. All right, so we we created a group also in my undergrad while I was a McNair Scholar that was called Wanji Oyate Education Cohort at Montana State University. And that was to engage with more Native students in becoming Native teachers, because we understood that it's really challenging to be a Native student and not have any teachers that look like us, right? So we were trying to address the need for that and recruit and attempt to retain Native students in education majors. And that was really awesome. So we did end up having a really big group. I think it's called Sign Now, and I'm not sure, Bill, if you know what that stands for. I can't remember its acronym, but there was an excellent turnout and everyone came together and supported each other and shared some of these hard times that they experienced, and then supported each other during that time. And so we knew it was a time that we needed to lead in our field, having these discussions and normalizing having these discussions, especially with faculty and staff, because we were tired of experiencing these things, especially within higher education, when we're in education, right? The Department of Education. And we felt that our professors should have had a better understanding of how they were addressing anything that had to do, or not addressing things that had to do with Native culture or Indian Ed for All lesson plan writing. And so we went to town, like trying to come up with creative ways to share our story and get the word out there so that we could attempt to share as much of our story and building of understanding of how our experience in the classroom, especially when we're confronted with racial microaggressions, like how that affects us, and how in turn that makes us not want to be in those spaces, right? And so we we made all kinds of different like public outreach situations where we confronted different faculty from different departments and shared our stories. And we I feel like we were able to accomplish quite a bit. And I want to reiterate, like, even though this research had been done in 2016, I feel like especially if you're a teacher in the classroom, exploring student narrative to help you build a better understanding of how to best serve your students, especially around racial microaggressions and how to confront racial microaggressions, is always probably the strongest way to a quick and sustainable solution. Do you want to go to the next slide? All right, and then we also utilized Montana's Indian Ed for All mandate to share how that, looking to that as sort of a tool for folks to learn more about Native heritage and Native students within the context of their classrooms and who they are serving. And uh, you know, Indian Ed for All is like kind of a catch-all sometimes, because everyone's like, yeah, I've heard of that, or yeah, that sounds good, but more times than none, like, they don't even go and check it out and they don't utilize it. So, as much as it is an awesome resource and a tool for educators to learn more about Native students, I think there's definitely a self-accountability aspect that needs to be incorporated. And as teachers, I think I would challenge you to consider that for yourself, and how or what are you doing to to learn more about these kinds of spaces and how to mitigate them and best serve your students, native, non-native, wherever you are, uh, to build a better classroom environment. Um, and so um, I don't know if very many of you have been to Bozeman at MSU campus or not. I'm not. Has everyone, Bill, or
No,
do you
there.
know?
Well, some of them have. We're split between Alaska and Montana, so a lot of them
Okay.
are Montana and have been to Bozeman. But yeah, it's not guaranteed for everybody.
Excellent. Gotcha. And so at the time, uh, at our institution, there was 570 Native students on campus, which was a really big deal. And since then, it has just continued to grow, which is awesome, but also recognizing that retention for Native students is also not very good at MSU, and really trying to get to the bottom of why that is. So that was kind of one of the main things that we wanted to focus on as well, especially within the context of education. And you can go to the next slide. Um, okay, so why is this still happening? Why are we having to have this conversation? What are we going to do about it? What am I going to do about it? And how is this going to affect me as a social studies teacher or teacher, an instructor through time? And I would just urge you to like always ask yourself these questions, because if we're not asking ourselves these questions, or if we encounter it and we've not ever taken the time to realize the harm that can be done in those situations, then I feel like we're not doing a service for our students. And so as an educator, it's super important for me to always try and figure out how to build support and trust with my students. And I think finding positive or healthy ways to have hard conversations can be actually like a good challenge for yourself, um, to practice. And one of the ways that we do that in asking yourself these questions is by utilizing mindfulness and best practices, because you really, the change has to start with you. Where are you? How relevant is this topic, and what do you need to do to figure out how to be successful in these challenges in your school and your space? Next slide. I'm sure a lot of you have, heard a lot of the buzz around critical race theory. At the time we utilized this, it wasn't such a big buzz or like concern, but it absolutely was a perfect theory for us to base our work off of, because it talked about different curricular microaggressions. It allowed for us to unpack what racial microaggressions were and why they're an issue, because a lot of people, they're like these racial microaggressions would come out and they wouldn't, like I said, not even know that they're doing anything wrong or hurting or harming anybody. And them just not even understanding that they're doing something harmful is a problem. And it's up to us as educators to figure out how to create a positive school climate, but also, especially if you have different populations that you serve, whether it be American Indian students, Black, white, urban, right? Like any kind of um, population, especially if they're mixed, like you kind of have some work on your hands. And if you're not trying to create a positive, trusting environment for your students, especially to have hard conversations, then that could be something that you might want to take the time to work on, especially with other educators in your school, because I think teaming up with folks can always kind of lighten the load and make it sort of a team effort, and also building advocacy and community within your school, so you don't feel like you're the only one that has to do this work, or that you're the only one that is willing to do the work. The more you can reach out and build community within this advocacy, the better. So I would just want to urge and support you, and let you know that, like, that was the best way that we found, um, that would have a successful outcome in this process. So yeah, so working with others, especially within your school. Next slide. These were like actual pictures we wanted to share with folks as we were doing this presentation in a few other spaces, because these are like legitimately, these are from 2016. So this was a basketball poster, this tribal family of a team, I believe from Illinois. And this was a high school basketball team. And this is what they decided to put on their poster, and what they had put out regarding, when someone challenged, why did you do that? They said they thought that they were honoring Native culture by doing it this way. And so right away, looking at this image, there's obviously some things that like jump out right away that that are problematic, right? And so it was definitely, you know, their thought in the whole process, and you might encounter this quite often actually, is that folks think that they're doing something for good or honoring, when in fact their actions are creating harm. And so that's really, really uh, one of the important aspects, the most important aspects of this, is being able to understand that and figuring out a way to work with that person to better understand, or people or groups to better understand why it's inappropriate, and doing it in a way, you don't have to go over and like feel like you're walking on eggshells, of course, but I think being able to do it in a way that's a positive outcome, as positive as you can create it, the higher chances that somebody is going to be able to catch themselves the next time, or assess themselves before they put content like that out there. Especially, hey, Indians, get ready to leave in a trail of tears round 2. And that was in Oklahoma. That was at a high school. And what we learned about this high school was that the high school wasn't even a native student populated school. Um, and yeah, that's just, there's just a lot of issues with that, and a lot of it is because the education isn't there to begin with, or there's a level of ignorance um, that's got to be reached, where they turn a corner and understand that it's problematic, and they're willing to do something about it. I'm going through a lot of stuff. Does anyone need it? And you have any questions? Are we doing all right, Bill, on time?
Yeah, I think we are, and yeah, folks, please do get your questions up. I'm gonna just because I'm screen sharing here, I can't monitor the questions quite as efficiently as I would normally. So I'm gonna escape out here and just make sure. Yeah, we see you, Chanel. Thanks for jumping in. You weren't late at all. We got a late start. But yeah, roll up any questions you have, folks. I know we've talked about everything from uh, addressing uh, censorship within libraries, the classroom. Talking about some of these more overt uh, acts of uh, racial aggression, whether they're intended to or not. Um, and I think one of the other things that always comes to mind, Danny, is like, what is kind of the more subtle aspects of racial microaggressions that folks might experience, and how might our students respond to those and that comes from a, a a lot of different vantage points. Like I really like the language that you used about who your people are or whatever that perspective is, because you could be a native and experience microaggressions, or you
Mm-hmm.
could be a non-native and be witness to them. They're both kind of the same kind of a impact. But Jeff had a great question here, so maybe we can talk about his a little bit. These seem blatant. What is the difference between this as a microaggression versus, uh, I guess, something more subtle? I would think Jeff is trying to say here, regardless of the intention. So yeah, why don't you help us a little bit with understanding that or get some reaction from you? I think he's talking about the posters, and regardless of
Oh, sure.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm trying to read this question and wrap my head around it here. Sorry about that. So I think the difference, I mean, like forward racial aggression, right? Like I think is that meant to be or is comes off as very much like intended. Like I know that I'm going to say this racial aggression towards you and what it means, and they know the implications of what they're saying as hurtful or problematic, right? And so the difference I think is that oftentimes racial microaggressions are a lot more subtle in that delivery. And like I said, like with the poster, um, these this group of students thought that they were, uh, doing something really cool and honoring Native students by showing, how beautiful their culture and how beautiful they they look, right? But that's just a romanticized understanding of what Native Americans are and what they're about. And where that comes out in is that essentially like a lot of people will experience this is that there's just no curricular content to address these issues. There's nothing in the classrooms teaching students about real tribal uh, people and their culture and their languages and history, right? It's more like, oh yeah, Indians um, uh, were a people of the past, and this is how they looked. And isn't it fun if we can do this too? And they had never been challenged in that thinking, so they continue to think that it's okay. So I hope that answers your question. That's how I feel about it anyways, and that's kind of what the research as far as like what a racial microaggression is more of a subtle delivery of um, uh, uh, an aggression towards somebody, and obviously with the aspect of or root of race.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect to that too, and that's why it's so context specific, that within the course of a school environment, a lot of times, whether it's a majority student population or a minority student population, just the mechanisms to understand is something either symbolic or, whether it's imagery or symbolism, or if it's more substantive, like within the course of curriculum, um, reaching that point of either overt or subtle microaggression. We're talking about the finite of the finite. If the posters
Mm-hmm.
are overt aggressions, if not lack of understanding, ignorance, maybe it's even intentional. In the case of the football game, that's pretty blatantly meant to be, um, sarcastic, if not offensive, within the context of an athletic situation. But we don't have
Mm-hmm.
the means to measure this, when your students are uh, either underrepresented or underserved in some way, maybe therefore disenfranchised in terms of voice and choice. A lot of times these kinds of things aren't picked up in a school climate survey, or there's a situation where students don't feel comfortable speaking to that teacher or a group of individuals. All these examples you're
Absolutely.
using are um, definitely pre. I think of the high school teacher that got up on her chair recently. There was a pretty viral
Yes.
video and started, seeing some in her eyes, some kind of tribal dance song, had feathers on, had the kids participating, and you know thought she was doing completely good, in her eyes,
Hmm.
blatant or otherwise. And so, thank you, Jeff, for answering those questions. But, context specific, how are you being vigilant about these things? Chanel talked about, I think of it as using outdated terms and not respecting others when
Hmm.
corrected. How do we create those spaces to be able to have those conversations? And also, being able to um, insert ourselves into that when we see it and experience it. I'll share a quick story and then we'll turn it back to our speaker. I was in a room full of literally some of the most educated people in, uh, that you can imagine talking about educational issues, PhDs, lawyers, and the person who was kind of in charge of the conversation at this particular point said, you know, I think these guys they were talking about, kind of the people that were being discussed, and they were talking about that they weren't thinking in a good frame of mind, and they said, I think these guys have gone off the reservation, and about three heads turned and looked right at me, and I immediately looked down. I consider myself a very outspoken individual, someone who is not only educated in these things but also, you know, uh, try to address them when they come across. And I couldn't say a word. I couldn't. I was so livid. If I said anything at that point, I knew it was it would not be what was effective. But I took a step back from that conversation. I actually had to get up and walk out of the room, go take a walk for about 10 to 20 minutes and cool down basically, and then come back and address it with that person. I think what was at stake was trying to maintain this person's dignity while also being able to express something very emotionally charged and very uh, uh, you know much a part of like anger. There was a physiological response that was really tough to manage and hold on to. But yeah, any thoughts, Danny, on strategies? And I'll get your PowerPoint back up here too, that teachers and librarians could use.
Yeah, absolutely. And like everything that we do as educators, especially in today's times when, we're spread really thin, doing a lot of covering a lot of different areas that are not traditional roles for teachers or librarians. And finding a balance in that is really important. And I feel like, as a native person, from my perspective, or as a native student perspective as well, because I encountered this both as a native student, but I also continue to encounter it as a professional, right, in the same kind of spaces that you're talking about, Bill. That we are so we are so used to it happening, it kind of, uh, we have like thick skin, right? So we can take it for a while. But then after time goes on, there's like a point where, like you said, Bill, like you felt rage and you felt emotion. And if you can put yourself in someone else's shoes, it's like there's a point in time where you just experience extreme racial battle fatigue, right? And you don't know if you're going to be able to hold your tongue and not respond because you're hurting. You essentially, there's a lot of things that are coming out in having to go through this. So as a native person, and thinking, especially with our young people, our young students who are having to go through this, like use that as your leverage and your motivation to advocate when those times seem like you don't want to deal with it and you don't have the energy, because it truly is emotionally and physically and mentally draining to people who have to encounter it all the time. And it's not right that we have to have a thick skin and be used to it, right? But that's the way of the world. We're walking in a predominantly white academic space that's completely westernized philosophies and ways of doing things, and we have to be able to figure out how to have safe conversations while addressing inequities and things that are wrong, just completely straight up wrong within the educational context, especially for our young people, because those racial microaggressions could send somebody over the top. And as a person that a native person experiences one thing, but there's also several people that I have worked with within different schools who are non-native working in native schools who put so much time and effort and trying to address these things in a really good positive way, and also experience that loss of energy and motivation because people look at you and challenge you and say, why are you doing this? And um you're just an Indian lover, and like those are things that are real. Like I've heard people share that with me, like they say these things, and it's not to get anyone upset, it's our reality, right?
Hmm.
So definitely trying to find a balance, trying to make sure that you are utilizing best practices within your classroom. So if you are practicing mindfulness, also teaching that to your students, to teach mindfulness so that you can have a safe space where when you are confronted with these racial microaggressions, you can take the time to stop the conversation and explain why that's problematic, and offer, or even if you have to say, let's look something up for a counter narrative to this, like what else can we use instead of using this, because this is not okay and it's wrong. And then there's a point where you are holding accountability to people, right? By saying, okay, that's not okay, we need to discuss this and have a conversation about it. But then if you know that it's the same person doing it over and over again, you realize it's no longer a racial microaggression. It's just racism, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
so there's definitely you have to pick and choose how much energy you have to spend on this yourself, especially with your colleagues, but definitely in the context of your classroom or your library space, that you want to address those things the best that you can. And in addition to that, like thinking about appropriate uh, literature for your students, getting rid of stuff um, that is outdated, like I think it was Shauna said, we can get rid of that stuff. Why do we have to keep it around and keep reiterating those misunderstandings and stereotypes, and allowing for our students to continue on this path of misunderstandings, when we can find really great resources that offer truth and respectful content.
Great.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I would, kind of qualify that too. Like I've never met. Let me. I gotta say this with my face there, so it's like, yeah. I've never met anybody that said, yeah, um, that was a microaggression, and I was borderline racist, or I was racist.
Mm-hmm.
There's always some kind of uh, explanation, rationalization, um, albeit poor ones or even just human ones, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
say that tongue in cheek, but it if you understand that people have a hard time kind of processing this for themselves, whether they are on the receiving side or the giving side, um, then that kind of takes away a lot of the power, and being able to address it.
Hmm.
Sandy pointed out, drawing from some of our literature, collection management for youth, that only 1% of the literature is focused on the topic of American Indian First Nations. Um, you know, Kind of perpetuating uh, those historically used terms, keeping indigenous folks in an arbitrary past. How can we help? The reason why we're having this conversation with Danny, folks, is that you're going to be in a position to try to help change that pattern,
Hmm.
literally from a commerce standpoint, and what is being provided within our schools. And it will always be contentious, it will always be done with minimal resources, but that's precisely why we're having this conversation. I know of First Book, is one organization that has historically tried to intentionally recruit and publish diverse authors, and working with teachers. They're a small nonprofit in a big ocean of publishers, and a complex system of how those books end up in the hands of our students, and our community members. But maybe you have some suggestion there. But thank you, Sandy, for drawing on the research on our literature, and yeah, keep the questions coming, folks. 'Cause I know we're running out of time. I think Danny, you got some more time with us here, so we can get some
Yeah,
more
yep, we're
questions in.
good. Yep,
Okay.
no problem.
All right.
And the thing about it too is like, you start with where you're at as a scholar, as an educator, right? So what can you do from where you're at? And so starting with being able to educate yourself with uh things that are problematic, and then being able to say, okay, well, let's look at the list of things that I haven't within my library or my classroom that can be changed and be better. And so um uh making sure that like you're putting the time in and diligence and creating better spaces and providing um better works, or even participating in research, right? Like there's different programs. One of them is called Reading Reimagined, and they're trying to find the best resources to serve people of color, students of color, from like third grade until eighth grade, because there's not a lot of information there. So, you know, we know that there's a challenge in finding really good quality information, but we also know that there's also a lot of native writers that are putting out better content that we just need to get access to. And so always digging, finding different websites to do that can be really helpful. And then you start easing into it as far as like the aspects of how to continue to advocate uh, of a more of a like style that is maybe offering professional development around these understandings and building toolkits for your colleagues so that they feel supported, and you're creating a culture and value system within your whole school that supports these understandings and ideas. And in doing that, it really does support your students in the best way possible, whether they're native or not, because you're giving them critical resources that are going to break down those stereotypes, as opposed to reiterating them with old work that is really inappropriate, right? And so those are really good first steps. And there is like a lot of really good research out there as well. And for the purposes of this research, we were coming from a native student perspective and native scholar perspective, and how we can change the curriculum, how we can share ideas and build community um, in advocacy by sharing things with each other. And truly, I think that's a really important part of this is, who are your people, and what can you do together? Don't try and be the lone wolf. find support, and then figure out ways to build on that as you can, right? Um, and so yeah. So also one a really great uh, a new publication is let me see. I just want to make sure I get the um, yeah. So it's called Indigenous Children Survivance in Public Schools, and it's by Leilani Savzalian. And I'm I'm sure maybe Bill, you've shared that resource, and if not, we can put it on here to share. But she really, the author of this book, was an Alaska Native, and she really shares a lot of her perspective within the curriculum, within especially certain parts of the year where it's like Thanksgiving and people are still teaching kids to put pilgrim hats and Indian headbands with feathers on them, and that's appropriate, right? And that's still happening, and that happened 30 years ago, and things have not changed. So what can we do to address that? Because those things need to change in order for us to move forward with the understanding that those are problematic and cause harm. And so those recognizing certain times of the year like Thanksgiving, making sure that you come out of that bubble, not staying in we only do American Indian work during Thanksgiving or during Native American Heritage Month, but normalizing that. And also normalizing having the conversation so that like from day one, the beginning of the school year, in your classroom, you set the stage for your students, um, of their expectations, your expectations of them, and how you talk respectfully, and how you may address challenging conversations, so that when you're faced with that, it can be a good positive learning outcome, instead of you don't want to be also cause harm in the way that you're like, um, how dare you say that, or get mad at them in front of their peers, because then that can also be like, that's one of the challenges, is being gentle in your delivery and mindful that this person, especially young people, don't have uh, the tools yet, and and essentially you're responsible for giving them those tools, and they may not, and there's a high possibility that there's a lot of people at home that are not instilling that understanding for their children because they themselves never got that education either, right? So they are kind of, I wouldn't say new concepts, but new concepts in that our generation of educators are now responsible for being able to teach these kinds of understandings, and uh, uh, create good positive spaces for our kids to have these hard conversations with each other without causing harm. You can go ahead and forward through. I think pretty much we went through microaggressions, and I gave you quite a few recommendations. And please, by all means, you're welcome to share this work with whoever would like to kind of read some of the research that we utilize, because I think they're really great tools for yourself and learning about uh, uh, how to build, I guess, just your own confidence in being able to address something that can be challenging and situational and delicate. Um, so yeah. So I hope that that's helpful. Um, let's see. You could go all the way. You can go all the way to policy futures and education, actually.
And we'll be sure to get this out to folks too.
Yeah. Yep. Always remembering to build community, build support systems for yourself, build support systems for your students. Think of it in the context of Native student experience, but also how important it is to build those foundations and thinking and understanding for non-Native students as well, so that they're critical thinkers around these challenges. Oh yeah, and one last story too. I was working in a middle school here in Bozeman, and I had lunch duty, and so I was in the cafeteria, and there's these lunch ladies that are the normal lunch ladies all the time. And I was sitting down, we were waiting for the students to come in, and one of the ladies, and this was a few years ago, so obviously like 2016, this is during um, Standing Rock. And this lady started chatting with her friend right in front of me, like probably not thinking anything of it. But in that school, at that moment, this woman was sharing how her family is from North Dakota, and she's just disgusted about the amount of Indians that were taking over spaces that have not been traditionally probably um, like seeing very many Native American people like within North Dakota because they don't get she was just saying like we don't ever see Native Americans in our community and now it's just full of them, she said, and she's like I just wish that it would all go away. And then she said I wish someone would just take a gun and mow them all down and it just be over with. And I just remember also feeling my body fill with rage and disgust, and I wanted to say something. And sometimes, and this is a reminder, like sometimes it's best not to say something right there in that minute, in that moment, because giving a reaction is probably going to be the opposite of what you want to happen, which is building understanding and advocacy. And so, what I did is I went down to the principal's office and sat down and talked with him. And thankfully, I had a really good relationship with the principal, and I was able to be very like talk freely about what had happened and why that's not okay. And he offered a lot of support in that situation, which was really helpful. But at the same time, like when you hear those kinds of offensive things said, especially in a school that is serving Native students, you just you wonder how can you possibly think that way, or how can you serve children? why why is that your mindset, and and it just was. And she tried to say that it was because she this is just new to her and she's just she didn't really mean it, and you hear that a lot. There's a lot of excuses, but I think excuses can be okay for amount of time, um but lip service, like can only go so far. It's putting action to making the change and assuring that folks are putting the work in. And so you're not the like racial microaggression police by any means, but uh in being able to speak to those challenging comments in a way that is professional and uh, positive can go a long ways, and it also continues your advocacy in this work. So you know it just is about finding yourself, building your foundation, um, and just moving with with what happens. Give it a try, um, give it a try, see how it goes, and then just try and be better the next time. That's what I always tell myself.
Yeah,
So,
great.
and that's all
Um,
we can do. Yeah.
yeah. Uh, let's get another question here before we wrap up, and really appreciate that kind of encouragement of like specific things that are soon to be librarians are doing. And um, one of the important aspects of that, like you said, is they don't have to be the microaggression police, but kind of having this knowledge and this understanding, and it's out there in lots of different forms. I'm really glad that Jeff feels like he has the training and support within his school district that he needs, and how can you all as a cohort support one another in that, and wherever it might arise. Um,
Mhm.
so any other questions from folks? Please get those in the chat box. And while we're waiting for questions, I want to remind folks, because I know we had a pretty hectic start to the webinar series, but so glad to have you all back. And you know our second Tuesday of next month, we'll be having our webinar series. We're still working out the details of who that person is. Lots of moving chairs here and stuff, trying to get people scheduled in for these. But uh, our deadline for the IPSL scholarship is April 1st. Please do get the word out. If you need any info, email us. You can email Dr. Reno or myself or librarymedia@montana.edu, and we will reach out to folks. Those wanting to make sure we get as many quality applicants as we possibly can in there. And so just been doing everything we can, from listserv to having informational sessions, of which tomorrow we have one. So if you know someone, please do send them. We'll have the correct link. We'll get that sent out for tomorrow, and just let us know. Or you can go to our library media on YouTube. I think Shawnee did that. Thanks, Shawnee, for pointing that out at the beginning. You can go there and always click on the live that is happening right now. You don't really need a link, but I really appreciate it. Um, Danny, any parting words before we go? It doesn't look like we have any questions, but folks are just thanking you for the great presentation. Thank you for sharing with us, coming from Sandy and Francie, as well as Dr. Reno herself. But yeah, any parting words of understanding or encouragement? And please do let folks know how they can get a hold of you. I know you're just starting out on your own to do some of the great work that you're doing for schools and universities and organizations around the country. And so please do let folks know how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to offer support to you in doing this work, because I know from my perspective, and encountering this in my lifetime, it was always the teachers that put in that effort that made a difference. And it doesn't matter, how big that, or how much that effort is, as long as like your students are seeing that you care about them. And that is a tremendous, there's a tremendous burden on you to do this work, but at the same time, you know, um, your students will value that a great deal and consider you a safe person. So thank you for listening to my presentation. And if there's any way I can support you in this, I always tell schools that I work with, I'm your biggest cheerleader, because you're serving our children, and you can make a difference. So thank you for your effort and your hard work and your thinking on these issues, because it can be tough. So I just appreciate all of you and your work. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
How can folks get in touch with you? Are you on social media, or are you still standing that stuff up?
Yeah,
Or
I'm on social media. You can find me on Facebook or on Instagram, but it just says Danny Morrison or Danny Morrison White. And I will share my email with Bill so that he can share that out. Um, just a Gmail that you can contact me, or a phone number. And I'd be happy and welcome the chance to talk to anyone if you want to talk more on any of these issues. Um, so yeah.
great. Thanks so much, Danny. Really appreciate you presenting it tonight. And thank you, everybody, for bearing with us and the technical difficulties, and look forward to hearing from you in our next webinar series. So second Tuesday of the month, We'll see you then. Take care.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.